Well, good evening, Soundside Church. Pastor Aaron coming to you and to your community group in particular. Tonight, we continue our series, How to Talk to God, as we look at selected Psalms and think about the way that they help to shape our communication to God and our relationship with God. And tonight, we're looking at Psalm 84. Again, one of my absolute favorite Psalms, and I think you'll see why by the end of this video. But as always, if you haven't yet read the Psalm out loud in your group, go ahead and hit pause on the video, read it, then come back. Okay, Psalm 84. One of the reasons I chose this Psalm, apart from being one of my favorites, has to do with the way that it does something so well. All the Psalms do this, but Psalm 84 really is kind of exceptional in this regard, and that is the way that it uses emotion. Emotion. Now, I don't know how you grew up. I grew up actually being taught to be somewhat suspicious of my feelings. At least in a church environment, I was taught that feelings are no guarantee of truth. Now, I agree with that statement. Our feelings can lead us very much astray from truth, and the whole follow your heart thing is misguided to begin with. However, God made us with emotions. And so much of what the Bible describes when it talks about us following Christ and getting closer to God is described in emotional terms. And the Psalms are no exception. And Psalm 84 just becomes a really powerful example of that. I hope that as you read this Psalm, and other Psalms, that it causes you to relate to God on an emotional level. God is interested in your feelings as much as he's interested in your thoughts and your choices and your actions. In fact, one of my favorite scholars, John Calvin, a 16th century pastor in Geneva, he wrote a 5-volume commentary on the Psalms, and to this day, it's still one of my very favorite commentaries, one of the best devotional commentaries ever. It's just incredibly heartwarming to read. In the preface to that commentary, he wrote this about the Psalms. He said, "I have been accustomed to call the Psalms an anatomy of all the parts of the soul, for there is not an emotion of which anyone can be conscious that is not here represented as in a mirror. Or rather, the Holy Spirit has here drawn to the life all the griefs, sorrows, fears, doubts, hopes, cares, perplexities, in short, all the distracting emotions with which the minds of men are wont to be agitated." I think that's fantastic because it doesn't matter how you're feeling, you can find that in the Psalms as it directs your relationship with God. So that's my hope as you read Psalm 84, is that you'll just become awake and alive to the emotions that are expressed there, and that you won't stifle those down, but you'll allow those to become part of your discipleship and part of your communication with God. Now, Psalm 84. You've read it. Hopefully you got the point of it, and the point is that the psalmist is longing to be in God's presence, to be in God's house. And he reflects on a group of people making a pilgrimage to God's house, in fact. And we find that here in verses 5, 6, and 7. I'm going to read these here real quick, and then I just want to comment on something. Happy are the people whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. They're going to be close to God. As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a source of spring water. Even the autumn rain will cover it with blessings. They go from strength to strength. Each appears before God in Zion. Real quick word about Zion. The word appears 38 times in the Psalms, not to mention many other places in the prophets. It's important for us to understand what Zion means, or what Zion would have meant in the psalmist's imagination. So Zion was a real place. It was a hill in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was situated kind of on the top of a mountain ridge. We wouldn't call them mountains. Maybe somebody in Iowa would call them mountains. They're hills. But within the city of Jerusalem, there were multiple little summits. One of those was Zion. It was a easily fortified place. So there was the city, and then there was the fortification. David, when he captured the city of Jerusalem, basically made that his fort, kind of fortified that area, that little hilltop called Zion. It got renamed. It was called the City of David. And then later on, he brought the Ark of the Covenant into Zion. After David's death, when Solomon built the temple at another hilltop in Jerusalem, he took the Ark of the Covenant from Zion, put it there in the temple. As a result of that, Zion became the name not just of a fortified hilltop, but it also kind of stood for the whole city, because the whole city was seen as the place where God dwelt. Of course, that idea got expanded so that the word Zion could be used not really even in reference to a physical hilltop, but to the presence of God in general. And then the idea gets expanded even farther to our dwelling with God in heaven, or even the new Jerusalem come to earth in the new creation with the new heavens and the new earth. So the idea of Zion goes so far beyond just a physical fortification. It represents the dwelling place of God, whether that is God's dwelling place in a physical temple, or the city where the temple is, or just God's dwelling place with his people, or the future dwelling place of God's people with God in his own city, in his presence. There are multiple layers to the word Zion, which actually I think gives us multiple ways of reading it when we come to it. And the New Testament writers used it like that. So we're not really stretching the interpretation here. We're just recognizing that Zion represents where God is, both now and in the future. And that's what the psalmist is really longing for. He wants to be where God is. And so he talks about these pilgrims, right? Their heart is set on pilgrimage. Now, whether they're actually making the pilgrimage or not, their heart is set on it. They go through the valley of Baca. What is that? That's the valley of tears. Okay, the valley of tears. Why are they crying? We don't know. It's difficult. It's hard. Could relate to the idea of a dry, dusty ground with really dense, thorny shrubs. The point is, they don't have any water, okay, which is why it's such a blessing when God sends the rains, okay? There becomes, they get this spring water. They take the difficulties, they dig out a spring if they have to, but then God brings the rains and covers the area with pools, and they go from pool to pool, getting stronger and stronger, which is where that next phrase comes in. They go from strength to strength. The closer they get to God in Zion, the more difficulties they pass through, but from those difficulties they gain strength. That strength puts them on to the next phase of the journey, and something else happens, and they get stronger, and they get stronger and stronger. And that phrase, going from strength to strength, that phrase has actually entered our English vocabulary. You may hear people use that phrase in, any situation, whether describing a sports team or a business. They've gone from strength to strength. That's where it comes from. But the idea actually gets picked up in the New Testament. We read in Romans chapter 1, verse 17, that the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. The idea in that verse is that as we trust in the gospel of Jesus, we live by faith. But we don't just live by faith, we go from faith to faith. The faith that we exercise today leads to a greater exercise of faith tomorrow. And as we follow Christ and get closer to him, our faith also grows. The same idea gets picked up in 2 Corinthians 3:18. For we all, beholding the glory of Christ, or beholding the face of Christ, are being transformed from glory to glory. That is, as we behold Jesus Christ in the gospel, we are transformed from one degree of glory to a greater degree of glory. That's the idea the psalmist is picking up on. He's using slightly different vocabulary, but the apostles will pick up on it. And the point is, if we have a desire for God, then our life becomes a journey to get closer to him. Along the journey, we will encounter difficulties. We'll pass through the valley of Baca. But as we pass through the valley of Baca, as we trust God, he will supply. And he'll supply enough for us to go on. And as we go on, we learn to trust him more. And that's what this journey of discipleship is all about. Yes, I have God's presence within me by the Holy Spirit. But I, like the psalmist, am longing for the day that I see him face to face. That longing is going to make my life a pilgrimage. And as I go on that pilgrimage, by God's grace, I will go from strength to strength, from faith to faith, from glory to glory. And I hope you will too. That is the kernel, the essence of where this psalm is taking us. And that's why this psalm can become such an aid to our prayers as we realize where we are and where we aren't yet. And we just say, you know what, God, a day in your courts is better than 1,000 anywhere else. I'd just rather be a doorkeeper or stand on the threshold of the door than dwell in the tents of wickedness. I would. I'd rather be just a servant or just standing in the threshold of the door than be famous and wealthy and powerful without you. That's Psalm 84. It shapes us. It shapes us, not just in our heads, but in our hearts. So I hope you enjoy this psalm tonight. I'm going to turn things over to your community group leader now.